Hello and welcome to our mini-series Enter the China Tech Dragon. As tech is an increasingly important aspect of China's business, not just as an import product, but increasingly more so as an export product, we decided to start this series to give a better insight for foreign tech companies on how they could enter the Chinese market. This mini-series will cover topics such as the tech trends that will be introduced in this first episode. Second episode will be covering how you could enter the China market yourself, followed by VETS licenses, an intro to VIEs, and last but not least, data and cybersecurity. Mark, please take it away.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks, Jerome. So I think firstly, if we look at the market trends, we're looking at what options tech companies have. Tech companies, they may license technology or they may set up an entity in China. And then I think the other kind of issues we're looking at from a broad brush is regulatory issues. So unlike manufacturers, tech companies face much more scrutiny when it comes up and restrictions when it comes to market access, licensing, permits. And this is particularly for companies which are VATs or telco companies or media companies. And a VATs company is even software as a service. Those companies will require these special operational licenses. And then we'll concentrate a bit on two topics that are important specifically for tech companies: intellectual property, which is kind of clear, but where we will also explain a bit what's happening in China, why it's important to establish your rights, but also why China's reputation is worse than it deserves, and how China's actually better at protecting IP rights than many people say. And then finally, data and cybersecurity. This has only come up in the last few years, but is increasingly a concern for any tech company that's moving data around or is reliant on a network. The market trends that we're seeing, perhaps the two most important, which are interconnected, is that even though COVID had a major impact on the Chinese economy, it seems to be recovering quicker than anybody else. And I think the other issue is the US-China tech war. So I think what we're seeing is China's market has become very interesting for tech companies. And also the Chinese are very keen to develop their own indigenous technology. And so I think developing this indigenous technology will still mean that they will import Western tech, or Western tech companies will still have a large role to play. And if you look at what's happening, in our practice, we've seen Chinese investment into US tech has fallen, quite a lot, but towards Europe, it's something of a high priority. So I think, these things are linked. China's a big economy and it's growing, or it's one of the few places still growing, and tech companies are looking to China for growth. And so we've seen a lot of US and European tech companies, digital companies, look at entering the China market in the last few months. I'd say the other trend that we've seen is, even though China's international expansion has slowed a bit, I don't think we've seen it that much in tech. If anything, it's sped up. So perhaps there's more but smaller deals in tech. And we come up against complexities, the US trade and tech war. So it's really made a lot of Chinese companies think 2 or 3 times before trying to go into the US. But even with Europe, we're finding that our outbound projects to Europe often come up against regulatory oversight and more concern than a few years ago. But most deals still go through. So I think it's still got a bright future. And then I think the other issue is the sectors that we see that are very hot are apps, fintech, autonomous cars, mobility, big data, especially with healthcare and AI. And all of these are very interesting both for China, but also Western companies. And so we've seen, Western companies in all of those segments reach out to China and look at different ways of getting into the market. But, however, tech and consumer-facing tech is a little bit sensitive. So very much like the Chinese companies come up against issues when they go overseas, international companies have issues when they go into the Chinese market. So I think it's going to be interesting. And I think we'll see more tie-ups, not less. And we'll probably see a lot of Chinese companies cooperate with international companies. International companies finding the Chinese market too big to ignore, but also, on the other hand, perhaps too difficult for them to do by themselves. So another term that we heard a lot about a few years ago, perhaps less in the recent years, is Made in China 2025. We've heard less about it in the last few years because it was off-putting to a number of China's international partners. But I think the intent is still clearly there, and where China really wants to become a dominant player in the global high-tech manufacturing field. And to a large extent, they've already accomplished that. So these high-tech industries include new energy vehicles, next-generation IT, telco, advanced robotics, AI. And I think really China is no longer being the workshop. They also want to be the design shop. And this will put them on head-to-head competition with the US and to a lesser degree, Europe. So I think what we'll be seeing is China will want to become more self-sufficient in high-tech industries, but I think that will still require them to team up with international companies for tech, because tech is not bound by any geographic location. And also, in order for them to go global, they'll probably have to cooperate with other players in other markets. So I actually think joint ventures will be more common than in the last 10 years. Also, tech companies, so I think mostly international tech companies will be watching this. So, tech companies, if you're in one of those sectors, now's a very good time to come to China, because local governments are giving subsidies, tax breaks, low interest loans and funding if you're in these kind of industries. So, it's a good time to come in. And what we've seen is a lot of companies are setting up and then encouraging Chinese companies to invest in their local Chinese companies rather than invest in the offshore company. This can be easier from a regulatory point of view, but also kind of makes sense because the Chinese companies' greatest added value will often be the Chinese market. And then I guess, there are concerns about cybersecurity law and policies about pushing R&D into China. I think these concerns are overblown, but we'll also discuss that in a separate episode.
This was the introduction video to our mini-series Enter the China Tech Dragon. If anyone has any problems, questions, or issues, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to oblige with a free consultation. We'll offer a free trademark check for anyone that is interested in this mini-series and an initial review of their business scope, anyone looking to enter the Chinese market. The next episode will be about how you as a tech company could enter the Chinese market.